It seems that every few days, the 3I Atlas interstellar object, whatever it might be, throws us a new curve. Recently, a team of NASA's Sphere-X Space Observatory researchers just reported tantalizing new data on this object. The observations made between August the 8th and 12th gave us a lot of new information about this object, especially when we're talking about composition. The Sphere-X Space Observatory views objects in the infrared and is especially designed for spectrographic analyses of composition of various types of objects. Although mostly interstellar objects, Sphere-X was mostly designed to study the galaxy, intergalactic objects, or nebula, that sort of thing. Very seldom was it supposed to be used on objects passing through the solar system. But given that the composition of 3I Atlas was getting stranger and stranger as time went on, NASA decided to point Sphere-X at 3I Atlas. And what it discovered was beyond bizarre. Not only is 3I Atlas not putting out the types of chemicals that it should be, that is to say, if it were a comet at this distance, it also appears to be much bigger than anybody thought it was. And if this is true, then an artificial origin becomes that much more likely. And even if it isn't artificial, we now know for certain that it is unlike any object that we have observed passing through the solar system before. Good afternoon, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin here on the 3I Atlas channel. Yeah, it's practically becoming that, as much as I like to call this channel the Angry Astronaut. Man, the stuff about 3I Atlas just keeps coming fast and furious, and it is so significant in my opinion. Things are happening right now with this object, or at least observations that are being taken of this object that are unique in the history of astronomy. We have never seen an object like this before. We can say that with complete confidence now. Even if this is a natural object, even if it is a comet or perhaps an asteroid, something along those lines, it differs from any object that we have observed in the solar system before. And that includes the other two interstellar objects that we have observed in the past. And also, significantly, 2I Borisov, the only interstellar comet, the only confirmed interstellar comet, and I say that with great confidence now. There's no way that we can confirm that 3I Atlas is a comet at this point. That comet differed so much from 3I Atlas that, again, as I suggested, it's tough to think that 3I Atlas is a comet, or if it is, it's very different from any comet we have ever seen before. Now, I have to be honest, as observations continue to increase and as our knowledge continued to grow about this object and as it got closer to the sun, I frankly expected this thing to start looking more and more like a comet. We would see a tail start to develop, spectrographic analyses would start to show a water coma around it, other types of gases that are characteristic of comets. I mean, frankly, as I've said from the beginning, I always thought that there was a very good chance that this was just a natural comet, but an interstellar comet, a little strange maybe in some ways, especially strange in the way that it's passing through the solar system. But I expected the more information we got and the closer it got to the sun, the more it would start to resemble a comet. And it isn't. Instead, what we are seeing is an object that does indeed seem to be outgassing, does seem to have that kind of behavior, but it seems to only be outgassing one type of gas, CO2. That's it. And that's never happened with any comet we have ever observed in recorded history, at least recorded history to the time to where we could examine the constituent chemical components of any particular object. As long as we've had the ability to tell what an object is made out of at a distance, we have never seen a comet that has done this. And we are only just beginning here, because the evidence, as it seems to have been presented, the evidence that we've gathered on this particular study that just came out, suggests that not only is 3I Atlas strangely producing CO2 and nothing else, it's also enormous, perhaps as much as 40 kilometers in diameter. And before I forget, folks, if you could do me a favor, there's a channel that has sponsored mine a couple of times, cash sponsor actually of this channel. It's called The Transporter Room, covers Star Trek topics, but they interviewed me. And if you were to check out that particular interview, get a lot of inside details about my background and such, I would very much appreciate it, because it would get this channel a lot closer to that all-important monetization, and it's linked in the description. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this latest study and what it means. These new observations from the NASA Sphere-X Space Observatory reveal, as I mentioned before, a cloud of carbon dioxide around 3I Atlas corresponding to a mass loss rate of about 70 kilograms per second. About 70 kilograms worth of CO2 per second is bleeding off of this object, but no water, no H2O was detected, with an upper limit of 4.5 kilograms per second on the water mass loss rate. So once again, even at a much lower loss rate than the CO2, absolutely nothing was detected by the Sphere-X Observatory. And keep in mind, this is a very sophisticated telescope. This thing sees in the infrared range, as I suggested before, and utilizing a technique called spectroscopy, the telescope splits light into 102 colors, or individual wavelengths, like a prism creates a rainbow from sunlight. This enables it to detect evidence of chemical compounds and molecules, each of which has a unique signature in the colors it absorbs and emits. Spectroscopy helps scientists measure how far away objects are as well, making it ideal for studying distant galaxies and mapping their locations in 3D. So this is a very significant discovery, because previous claims of water detection in recent studies were showing a much higher amount of water in a water coma surrounding the object, which Avi Loeb says was unsubstantiated by the reported data, and this latest study seems to prove that. There seems to be no evidence of water, at least not any sort of water outgassing or water coma surrounding the object at all, and the Sphere-X report doesn't seem to mince any words over that. Quote, "The lack of a bright water gas coma is puzzling, as 3I Atlas was not too far outside the solar system's water ice line at 2.5 astronomical units during the observations." Now, a comet outgassing CO2 with no water gas being present is not without precedent in our solar system. We have observed that. However, comets only outgassing CO2 do definitely have carbon monoxide being outgassed at the same time. So you never have a comet with CO2 being detected without carbon monoxide also being detected, because both of these gases have a much lower temperature sublimation rate, whereas water requires a little bit more heat in order to get sublimation and outgassing. Let me give you an example. Comet 67P at 3 to 4 astronomical units away, so further away from the sun than even this object is at the moment, showed variable outgassing, with CO2 dominating, but CO2 H2O ratios still being detected, and carbon monoxide was consistently detected, especially at the deeper layers. This comet was dominated by CO2 outgassing, but still carbon monoxide and water gas was detected. And then the C/2016 R2 comet, detected by the Pan-STARRS telescope at a distance of 2 to 3 astronomical units, so comparable from the 3I Atlas distance at the moment, was carbon monoxide dominated, with a high carbon monoxide land-to-water ratio with low H2O production. CO2 was detected but was less abundant than carbon monoxide. Once again, no carbon dioxide without carbon monoxide. Let's have a look at one more comet, Comet 29P Schwarzmann-Wachmann 1, and this is a Centaur comet that was active at a distance of 6 astronomical units. We're talking about almost 1 billion kilometers away from the sun, and still had active outgassing with carbon monoxide-driven outbursts, with carbon monoxide production rates often exceeding CO2. H2O is typically undetectable at those kinds of distances because, once again, that far out it is so cold that you're not going to get any water sublimation. So we expect to see a comet with just carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide at those kinds of distances, but once again, there is no precedent for a comet that has CO2 outgassing with nothing else. Now, what's even more mind-blowing is the fact that the Sphere X images show 3I Atlas as a point source. In other words, the nucleus seems to be generating the light. No dust coma was resolved, implying that the glow of scattered sunlight around the object in the Hubble Space Telescope image is compact and amounts to small amounts of dust, indicating that either this thing is generating its own light or it's very, very big. The Sphere X images were taken at specific wavelengths near the characteristic emission lines of water, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. No coma was detected, as I mentioned before, with either water or carbon monoxide. However, the CO2 image shows a symmetric cloud around 3I Atlas with a brightness that declines with projected distance to the power of -3 out to distances of at least 348,000 kilometers. That's almost as far out as the orbit of the moon around our planet. But most interestingly, the flux detected at a wavelength of 1 micrometer from 3I Atlas suggests a large nucleus with a diameter of 46 kilometers. If this represents a solid body, then the mass of 3I Atlas must be 1,000,000 times bigger than the previous interstellar comet 2I Borisov, and millions of times larger than Oumuamua. This makes little sense, since we should have found on an order of 1,000,000 objects the size of 2I Borisov before discovering a 46-kilometer interstellar object. Moreover, as Avi Loeb noted in his first paper on 3I Atlas, the amount of rocky material per unit volume in interstellar space is too small by a factor of 10,000 than the value needed to deliver into the inner solar system one giant rock of this size over the Atlas decade-long survey. Alternatively, 3I Atlas may have targeted the inner solar system by technological design. This possibility is consistent with the alignment of the trajectory with the orbital plane of the planets around the Sun, a coincidence of a part in 500 for a random orientation. The lack of cometary tail in the Hubble Space Telescope image is evidence that there is not much dust around 3I Atlas, with particle size on the scale of the wavelength of sunlight, about 0.5 micrometers. And I've talked about this strange characteristic of 3I Atlas a number of times. If it had small particles of dust being burned off of its surface by the sun, those particles should be trailing behind the object, being pushed back by the solar wind, as is the case with most cometary tails. But instead, we have a halo of dust, or whatever it is, advancing in front of the object. That is very strange indeed. But once again, it doesn't appear that most of the glow, most of the radiance from this object is coming from the dust itself. In other words, the observed reddening of the spectrum of reflected sunlight should originate from the surface of the object, implying that the object is large, or perhaps once again there's a glow that originates from the object itself, that it generates its own light and dominates the reflected sunlight rather than the dust cloud around it. The CO2 mass loss amounts to the ablation of a millimeter-thick layer from the surface of a 46-kilometer rock over a period of 10 years. This means that a relatively thin outer layer is sufficient to maintain the observed cloud of CO2 gas gas and dust around 3I Atlas. What lies under this outer layer is still unknown. We are waiting for the release of the first data from the James Webb Space Telescope when it observed 3I Atlas on August 6, 2025. That's right, James Webb looked at this object 18 days ago, and we still don't have any data from that observation at all. Is NASA trying to hide something from us? Well, let me point out one last very strange thing about this object. Its point of origin appears, at least in the sky, to be coming from an area that corresponds to the constellation of Sagittarius. And that, coincidentally, is very close to where we detected the famous WOW signal. Now, though, it has been determined with some degree of certainty anyway that the WOW signal was actually a powerful burst of natural radio energy that happened to pass through a cloud of water vapor, therefore generating what appeared to be an artificial signal. All we really know is a very powerful burst of radio energy went through this cloud of water vapor for us to observe it in 1977. And the WOW signal came from here. 3I Atlas appears to come from right about here. Now, is it just a coincidence that the strangest object to ever pass through our solar system happens to come from roughly the same region of the sky as the most compelling narrowband transmission that our civilization ever picked up? Well, maybe, but we're running into a lot of coincidences right now with this object, and that deserves further investigation. NASA has very little time to plan an operation whereby they will point the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's observational equipment towards this object as it passes by Mars, and even less time to plan an intercept mission with the Juno spacecraft before it makes its way past Jupiter. And NASA thus far has shown no willingness to do either of these things, which makes me even more suspicious as to their real motives. So in closing, I have to say it's difficult for me to even figure out the most appropriate thing to say here, because I've been saying all along that this is a very strange object, an object that differs from comets and other natural objects that we have seen pass through the solar system in the past. But frankly, I didn't expect it to be this strange. I expected, as I said before, that the more information we got, the more 3I Atlas would start to resemble a comet. But at least at present, that seems to be heading in entirely the opposite direction. And if 3I Atlas is indeed this massive object, and on top of all of that, it happened to pass through the solar system in a trajectory that adhered to the plane of the ecliptic, or very close to it, therefore allowing it to pass very close to 3 different planets, all of the improbable things that have happened with this object thus far, on top of the improbable nature of it, a 40-kilometer diameter object. If it indeed is that big, well, it is an outlier in a huge way. And I think at that point, we really need to start looking at an artificial origin for it. Not necessarily to suggest that this is some sort of spaceship. I think that it probably is some sort of massive asteroid or Kuiper Belt object type of thing. But it could be an asteroid ship of some kind, a huge natural object that has technological direction behind it, perhaps machinery or a habitable environment at its core, something along those lines, a modified asteroid, which frankly in many ways is one of the best ways that somebody could travel from star to star anyway, because if you're traveling those enormous distances being bombarded by cosmic rays the whole way, well, what better protection than an asteroid, a dense asteroid that can provide enormous amounts of protection for a habitable space at its core, or perhaps not even habitable, perhaps just machinery that would operate far better if it had good radiation protection. In any event, 3i Atlas is throwing us all kinds of exciting curves that need to be covered promptly. And I'm going to go ahead and close this episode by assuring everybody, all my spaceflight fans, that I've got something coming out very soon for you folks. Not only tonight, I'm going to be covering the Starship Flight 10 tonight, so we'll start with that, and then there is an interstellar flight episode that I was planning to release today, will be coming out tomorrow instead, about how human civilization could realistically travel from star to star or even substantial distances through the galaxy in a human lifetime. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. It is that kind of support that frees me from the YouTube algorithm, allows me to create a wide variety of content, even if it doesn't happen to be particularly popular. So if you'd like to make sure that that kind of content continues, and also in return, you get a library of exclusive videos for Patreon supporters, and also you get a Discord membership, an exclusive Discord channel for Patreon supporters, where we have lots of people who know quite a lot about the topic that we talked about today, 3i Atlas, together with spaceflight topics, who are actively discussing this whole situation on Discord. So if you'd like to join them, as little as $3 a month to join Patreon. So please check out the description. Thanks again, and until next time, stay angry about space.